Good morning, nerds. I have Allie Dalsimer from Virginia with me. Allie's running for Congress, but before we get into it, hello, nerds!
Hello, nerds!
Woo! Oh my, good morning, Allie. How are you doing?
Good morning. I'm super excited to be here, Tom. Thank you.
Yeah, and I guess it's technically good afternoon over on the East Coast, eh?
It is now. Yep.
Yes.
Just barely.
Well, welcome to the Nerd Zone. For those who are not familiar with you, just give us a little bit of introduction, like who's Allie Dalsimer?
Yeah, I knew you were going to ask that question. And I've been thinking about it actually all morning. And I was going to say something like, well, I'm a woman who's got 30 years professional environmental experience. I'm a mom of two amazing kids who's volunteered in her community and in her church and every school the kids have gone to, and all these things. But I realized they're all things that I've done. And at the risk of being philosophical, I kind of feel like who we are is a culmination of our life experiences and the people we've met and all of that. So if you're cool, I'd like to do the Sparks note, like the 5 minutes of my 50 years.
I love it.
Okay. Good. So I'll do a real top level, right? I was born in New York, but I left when I was 6 weeks old because my father was stationed in Africa. So I went to Africa, spent my first 5 years there. My parents were both doing work, and I don't remember a lot of it. Obviously, I was young. When I was 5, we came back. We lived in California. My dad was taking some classes in Swahili. I spoke no English, which, I spoke French. I spoke some Arabic and some Lingala. So, first grade was a challenge, but it was cool. Unfortunately, my parents split. We ended up going to Massachusetts for a year, then coming to Arlington, Virginia for a year, which is near where I live now. Raised by a single mom. She was super active in the Democratic Party. We listened to Helen Reddy, I Am Woman, wore the Now buttons, had a t-shirt that said, a woman's place is in the House and the Senate. Just doing the whole kind of one day at a time life, if you are familiar with that old show. Meanwhile, my dad would come and get us on Sundays, and he would take us hiking and biking, and he was super athletic, and we did environmental stuff, save water, shower with a friend, that kind of thing, right? Take all you want, but eat all you take, and, raised with that kind of conservation ethic. And then in my teens, my dad went back to Africa. He was stationed there again. And so we had been spending summers with my grandparents. My grandfather was a Presbyterian minister. My mother's actually first generation, so my grandfather was Welsh. My grandmother was Scottish. So we had a lot of that really cool cultural experience in the summers when my cousins and my sister and I would spend our summers there. Anyway, he went back to Africa in our teens. So we started spending summers there. We were in Chad. We were in Burkina Faso, which at the time was Haute-Volta. We were actually there for the coup, which my father handled super well. My sister and I, not so much. January 6th actually brought back a lot of memories about that event, which were kind of stressful. And then in Zaire, which when we were there the first time was Congo, and is Congo again, but when we were there, it was Mobutu, who was a leader who got very wealthy on the nation's resources. Came back, ended up going to school in Richmond. I doubled major English and psychology, very active, did synchro swim, lots of clubs, whatever. However, we'd gone from 70s, woman power, to the 80s with Reagan and ketchup as a vegetable. And, women are nobodies, basically. Women are objectified, right? It's whatever. And so I had this like super low self-esteem and graduated I did well in school, graduated felt I couldn't do anything. Ended up waitressing, went into the restaurant bar industry, realized I was actually good at it. Did that for 5 years, worked my way up to assistant manager bar that at the Marriott downtown, and realized I never saw any of my family or friends because, you work all the money shifts, right? Which would be weekends, evenings, holidays. Decided to go for office work. Kind of fast forward a few months, ended up back in the DC area. I moved it back in with my mom. My dad had a friend who worked at a temp agency, so I went there and she got me on a couple interviews. If you've read some of my story, I went on 2 interviews the same day and was offered both jobs, which was super cool. One was at a corporate law firm and one was at a nonprofit environmental foundation. I did choose the foundation, even though it was 40% less pay, but that was because, like, money isn't everything, right? Like, you need money for your basics, but nobody really needs like a bunch of money. And the thought of doing something that wasn't at all personally fulfilling or meaningful in any way wasn't worth it. So I worked at the foundation, and that was the start of my career that ended with me managing the natural resources program at Department of Defense, which I can talk about if you like. On the personal track, I met a man who decided that I did have value and helped me realize I had value. And he later became my husband, and we had 2 kids. We moved, had the suburbs and caring for my mom and volunteering at the church and in every school the kids went to and in the local community. And my husband did get cancer, terminal cancer, so I had to nurse him through that. My mother went blind. They don't really know why, but they think it was like an African virus thing that was in her system. So we still try. I'm her primary caregiver now. My kids one has gone off to college, one's in high school. And through COVID, and this is kind of getting into kind of why I'm running, but through COVID, a lot of the things came up that just made me really, I'm getting into the next question. Anyway, these are who have made me who I am. I'm a person who is very passionate about family, about the environment, about healthcare, about equal rights for everybody. I was raised in a very diverse kind of environment, and that's what makes me who I am now. Who is different than who I was 20 years ago, and no doubt will be different from who I am 20 years from now. But right now, this is who I am.
What an interesting background. So international and punctuated by, sounds like a lot of struggle and some pain as well, right?
I think everybody's life has struggle and pain.
Mm-hmm.
And what one person feels is a challenge, another person who has maybe experienced more or less of a challenge might not feel the same, because it's all our personal interpretation. We view life through our own personal lens. I definitely feel that what we go through, my grandmother used to say, what doesn't break us makes us stronger, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that. I believe that if you can, people can deal with anything if they just can persevere and really dig deep. And to do that, you have to have love. You have to have faith, whatever that means for you as a person. And you have to have belief that things will get better. And I have all those things. And I also have a strong belief. So there's this saying, right, where luck is when hard work meets opportunity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, the harder I work, the luckier I get, right? That's my philosophy. It's what I teach my kids, right? So as long as I'm working hard, things will work out. Maybe not in the short run, but in the long run, things will work out.
How did you find the strength to persevere like that? I mean, sounds like your mom, losing her sight, your husband, trying to deal with cancer and then, ultimately passing away. That's a lot to take on and then raising 2 kids. What was kind of powering that a lot of people would have just thrown up their hands, and here you are now running for Congress. Like, what's the motivation? Like, how are you finding the reserves to do this?
So on my personal Facebook page, I have my motto for life. And it's to paraphrase, it's a line from Jackie O. And she said, if you mess up your kids, nothing else you do really matters. My number one job as a mom is to take care of not only my kids, but kids, right? I'm running for Congress not because I'm looking for a career in politics, right? Like I've had a career, you know. I'm doing this because the world is messed up, because our current representative is not, representing the people of this district, not the vast majority of them, certainly not the average person in America. I'm doing it because we need to get things right for kids, right? We need to get things right for the next generation. And that motivates me. And it's part of what's driving me to this run for Congress. But it's really what kept me going originally. I knew that if I fell apart. So I mentioned I was a psychology major in college, right? That was one of my majors. And, child developmental psychology was one of the things that I studied in particular, that and abnormal psychology. And one of the things that we've learned, and pretty much anyone who watches like Criminal Minds, would know this. No great insight here. But basically, if you have a screwed up childhood, and especially if your mother is screwed up, your chances of being successful in life when you grow up as a child, as you grow up, they're severely curtailed, right? So I had to hold it together, just like every single mom has to hold it together so that, her kids, my kids, everyone's kids can reach their full potential. It's part of why, early childhood learning and education is such an integral part of my platform. Because, I read this, learned this statistic just this week in a meeting I was at, that a child's zip code, when they're between the ages of 3 and 8, their zip code is the single biggest predictor of whether or not they'll end up in college or in jail. What the fluff is wrong with that, right?
Yeah.
That's not right. So, so I'm getting a little off topic, but what drives me is the need to do the best I can for the next generation.
So tell me about the decision to run. You could continue to volunteer locally to help out with the schools and, focus on the kids, take care of your mom. Like that's plenty on the list of things to do each day. What was that decision process like? Oh, and I'll run for Congress. Sounds like a pretty big item to add to the list.
Yeah, actually, there was a whole process there. So my job was eliminated by a Trump appointee, basically, who didn't think natural resources. So I found myself at the time. I started my own business and was working on that. And then COVID hit and it was like, okay, well, that's not going to work. Then I started doing a lot of reading and learning and becoming more and more aware politically of what was going on. And, there was a lot going on last summer, right, with the Black Lives Matter movement and what everything was going on with COVID. And just, COVID put everything into hyperdrive in terms of showing us how much was wrong.
Yeah.
And so my son and actually we're watching Netflix, and we were watching Knock Down the House. And he looks at me and was like, Mom, you should run for Congress. And I was like, I don't know. But that started a conversation, right? And then we went back and forth. There was a lot of things that went on, a lot of things that go into such a big decision. But the final straw was watching the nightly news, the local nightly news one night. And the reporter came on and said, so Congressman Connolly, and that's our district's representative, Congressman Connolly has held up the HEROES Act for 48 hours so that he could add a rider that would give $3 billion to defense contractors. Now, we know now that 75% of that money didn't go to the people. It went to corporations and stuff, but we didn't know that then. And I was like, $3 billion for defense contractors? People are waiting in food lines. What is this man thinking? And a lot of that money went to pay for like corporate headquarters and for executive bonuses. How is that important? How is that in any way important when people are losing their jobs, they're losing their homes, they're struggling every day? And I was just, it was the final straw. And I looked at my son and I was like, oh my God, this just happened. Can you believe it? And he said, yeah, I can believe it. I've been telling you this. And I was like, I'm done. Oh, you're right. I have to be the change I want to see. This is ridiculous. We ended up calling a woman who primaried him last cycle. And she had a very small campaign, just a few volunteers. She only raised $28,000. She got nearly 25% of the vote. So the district's ready for change, right? And I called her and was like, are you going to run again? And she had a lot going on personally with school and her mom and some other things. And she wasn't. And so, okay, if not you, who, right? Like people say these things, but if you think about them, if you think about these sayings that are out there, they're super powerful. If not me, who? So we launched.
And how many other people do you think are going to be in this primary? Is it just going to be you and the incumbent, or are there a few others?
Me and the incumbent.
Wow.
It's going to be me and the incumbent. He's already doing what he can to try and like smash our campaign. So it's kind of funny. He's definitely scared because he knows that if people find out, so he spent like, he's, by the time it's like, he's just gotten nominated or elected to his seventh term, right? So it'll be 14 years when he finishes.
Yeah.
And he's just spent, especially the last few years, kind of flying under the radar, saying one thing and doing another. Like he had a tweet last week. He was like, or was it this week? I don't remember. It was like, Amazon, terrible. You remember, because the Amazon was all over Twitter for Louisiana a few days ago. It's like, Amazon, just horrible. And he took $17,000 from Amazon last cycle. He takes more money from the military industrial complex than 95% of Congress. He's the ninth most, like he receives the ninth most money in Congress. 90% of his money is corporate PACs and dark money. So, it creates, I talk a lot about this. It creates a perverse incentive, right? Just like there's a perverse incentive for profit in healthcare, profit in education, profit in criminal justice reform. If you have a profit in your representative, it creates a perverse incentive. Who's he supposed to represent? The people who are putting him in office, or the people who maybe voted for him but haven't given him, $3 million. Obviously that's why we need campaign finance reform. It's absolutely why I'm not taking any corporate money, any corporate PAC or dark money. Absolutely not. I talked about phrases that are used a lot but have true meaning, and government by the people, of the people, for the people. That's a very powerful phrase if you really think about it and break it down, right? And I don't believe that that's what's happening with the vast majority of these corporate Dems, and certainly not, any corporate. I think that progressives have a lot more in common with other progressives in the Republican Party, Democratic, Libertarians, whatever, than they do with the corporately funded mainstream, whether it be Republican or Democrat, right? Because we have genuine disagreements about some of our policies, but we're all committed to not taking the corporate PAC and dark money because it perverts government. You're not truly representing people because your constituents aren't the people. Was that too much?
So how are you going to navigate the what do you think is the role that the local Democratic Party is going to play? Because you're running against someone that the party knows that is a known quantity, who has some now established tenure and relationships in the Congress. He's probably on some important committees and that kind of thing. Do you feel like you've got a fair shot to to challenge him, or like how do you think that's going to pan out in terms of the within the party kind of dynamic?
That is a super insightful and excellent question, and something that we are definitely dealing with now and going to have to deal with going forward. It's just to air a little dirty laundry. When before we launched this campaign, I was trying to be polite. I called every single state delegate and senator who is within or close to our district, and I called Jerry Connolly. I actually spoke to his wife to let them know that I was going to be launching this campaign. It's not a personal thing. I just had genuine policy differences. And then we launched, and I'd learned from the Jen Perlman thing to get my, our website locked up. Like, yeah, didn't think about Twitter. Ally for Congress and Ally FOR, number 4 and FOR were both locked up by some like robot account, right? Like somebody had locked those up so that we couldn't use them, right? Those have since been released, I think, because the person who literally logged into one of the calls he's had was Ally for Congress, and after the call released it, and I appreciated whoever did that. But I'm also attending every single district meeting that I can, and when I can't, we send one of our team members. We have a core group of awesome volunteers right now. And they've been going on the campaign's behalf so that we can really hear what the issues are in the district, right? And I've learned a lot, and it's been informing our policy platform. What's interesting is that we had 2 meetings in a row where the links that we had didn't work. I ended up contacting the person. These meetings did happen, but the links had changed and I wasn't notified. So I'm not going to cast aspersions. It's an odd coincidence. I did, like I said, contact the head of the local Democratic committee who's in charge of scheduling, and I will hopefully be on these calls going forward. In addition to which, our opponent has signed on to, I think, about 30 pieces of progressive legislation that have been sitting around since 2017, 18, 19, that he's never had any interest in. And suddenly he has signed on to them, and he is calling himself, your friend in progressive policies or politics, or I don't know how he worded it. It was very bizarre. So he's like suddenly everybody's progressive friend. He sent out an email to every Democratic registered voter in the district, because of course he's got that info. Talking about how he was so supportive of HR1 and Cori Bush is his friend, and didn't mention that he actually voted against her amendment to allow former prisoners to vote. So, doesn't mention when he votes against progressive policies, just highlights that he is so supportive. He signed on to the Green New Deal resolution, but Virginia has an amazing Green New Deal Act. It's super good. I recommend everybody who's interested in environmental stuff to look at it. He's never acknowledged it, let alone endorsed or signed on to it. So, I could go on a long time. These are the kind of things that we're dealing with, even though our campaign's only a month old. But we're rising to the challenge. And in the end, if we can get our message out, I really believe when people know that they have an alternative, that we're going to get the support.
Where do you think the voters are? When I hear Virginia, I guess I imagine this is a state that's kind of in transition, maybe a little bit like Georgia. There seems to be this kind of evolution of voting patterns. Do you feel like the district is ready for a more progressive stance? Because I'm guessing there probably are a lot of people who are employed in the military industrial complex in that district, and maybe the representative is kind of bringing home some pork, or some economic spending for his district. How do you feel the voters are going to respond?
Yeah, it's another good question. I think there's a couple different answers there. First of all, I think you're absolutely right. Virginia's in transition. If you look at what's been going on in our state house with trying to legalize marijuana, that didn't come out fully the way I think some folks wanted it, but it did go well. Abolishing the death penalty. I mean, kudos, right? I mean, if murder's wrong, murder's wrong. So a lot of things, electric vehicles and other things. The Senate is not quite there yet because it's a grassroots, bottom-up kind of thing that's happening. And it's happening in this district too. And I think the voters in this district are ready. I mentioned the challenger in the last primary getting nearly a quarter of the vote with no name recognition. I mean, I remember we went to our polling place and he had one little sign, and Connolly had, I don't know, conservatively, 200 signs, something like that, including one that one of his people had put in front of hers, which I thought was so sketch. We found out about her from the little sample ballot that they hand out, you know, and we were Googling her. My son and I were Googling her and like, oh yes, okay, Medicare for all. Oh yes, Green New Deal. Yes, okay, great. So if we can get the word out about our campaign and our platform, I feel pretty confident that a lot of people will vote for us. To the second part of your question, yeah, there are a lot of federal employees here, and there are a lot of contractors who support federal agencies, DOD and other federal agencies. And I'm not talking about not representing them. I'm talking about representing more than just them. Right now, that's the sliver that Connolly represents. And I think, you know, I think if you're in that sliver and you don't really care about other people, fine. But I think there's a lot of people in that sliver. In fact, I know for a fact, because I was in that sliver, right? I care about other people. So yes, I may have had good benefits and job security, but that doesn't mean I don't want other people to have good benefits, a living wage, these kinds of things. I do want other people to have that because we can, you know, a rising tide lifts all ships, right? And so I think there are people who are just staunch corporate Dems. Fine. If you're happy with the status quo, fine. I think that the vast majority of people in this country have seen what the status quo means. Like I said earlier, COVID has really brought a lot of things to light that were bubbling under the surface in terms of economics, in terms of healthcare, in terms of racial injustice, all kinds of things. And I just genuinely believe that we need to represent everyone. For example, Virginia, I just learned this in one of my meetings. I've lived here freaking since I was 8 years old. I had no idea. Virginia is 50th out of 50 in worker rights. Why is Virginia one of the wealthiest states, 50th out of 50 in anything? We have no excuse. We have a good economy. We've got abundant resources. We've got whatever. It's because our representatives aren't enabling our workers. And a lot of that is due to corporate influence or, well, we don't need to go into all of it again. The point is that there are a lot of people in this district who are not being represented by the incumbent. They're just not.
Well, let's talk a little bit about if you were in the Congress today, what you would do. Obviously, the big stimulus has been in the news a lot lately. I've noticed seems to be a couple of interpretations of that. On the one hand, I see a lot of pro UBI progressive folks saying, hey, this didn't go far enough. There wasn't enough support for individuals. Like, why so much for companies and corporations? And then I see another side, which is like, hey, this is not bad for 45 days in office. You know, this is a good start for the Biden administration. And in some ways, like Biden, you could consider him kind of a centrist Democrat, but he seems to be trying to get things done. And so I was just kind of curious, like, what's your take if you were sitting in the well of the Congress and you were debating this or trying to decide how you wanted to vote? What would your kind of thought process be?
I think that relative to Trump, we are in a better place today. I think that Biden genuinely believes that the system that existed before Trump is a good system. I'm concerned that the system existing before Trump, if it exists now, will lead us to a second Trump, because clearly people were disenfranchised and ignored and underrepresented. In terms of how I would vote or what I think of the vote, I'm not in Congress, and I'm sure there are insider things that I'm not aware of. My thought is that we need to help people. I am of the thought that if you give, well, it's not my thought, right? It's basic economics. If you give people who don't have a lot of money, they will spend it in their local economies. They'll pay rent, they'll buy food. You know, if they have enough, they'll go out to eat, they'll buy entertainment, whatever. All that money is economic stimulus for the local economy. If you give money to mega corporations or to super rich people the way Trump did, that money leaves the local economy, right? Because it gets spent overseas on a second home or buying a Lamborghini or whatever. It doesn't matter. The point is that I am a genuine believer that if you truly want to stimulate the economy and help people, you need to give them money. Ideally, guaranteed jobs, living wages. I'm still wrapping my brain around. I appreciate $15 an hour minimum wage, and I think that that's probably good in some places. In this district, the cost of living in Fairfax County is 150% higher than it is in the rest of Virginia. $15 an hour is not a living wage. It's just not. And it wouldn't be in, New York or LA or other places like that. So I'm a big believer in helping people. And how I would vote on this, that would be speculation. I can't say. I certainly would vote for anything that would help people. Does that make sense? I'm kind of waffling a little bit because I feel like both those things are right. Like both of those premises you laid out are right. Like It's great for 45 days in office. Great. I'm glad you did it. It's better than nothing. At the same time, it really didn't go far enough, right? Like it took out the $15 wage and did other things. It really wasn't enough. But here's the problem, right? It's never going to be enough until we can get more progressives into office, until we can get true campaign finance reform, where corporate money is not allowed to influence politics. Because when that happens, then we truly get a government that represents the people and the people's interests, right? And then we truly, because government, like I said before, representation is a public good, right? You wouldn't have, the Grand Canyon brought to you by Chipotle or Old Navy or McDonald's or whatever. I shouldn't pick out certain companies, but whatever. Because that creates an incentive for that company to build lots of those little things in Grand Canyon, at which point you've just ruined the beauty of one of the most amazing places in the world because it creates a perverse incentive. So if I were going into Congress, you kind of started with that. If I were going into Congress, one of the first things I would do would be to sign the Fair Representation Act that Don Beyer introduced, which almost no one supports because it introduces ranked choice voting nationally. I'm a huge supporter of ranked choice voting, right? Because then you get the will of the people. I would also, and this is something I haven't really talked about too much, but where our campaign is drafting up language, because one of the first things we'd like to do is introduce a bill that says, if you take money from any given corporation, you must recuse yourself from voting or influencing a piece of legislation that would impact that corporation. So if you take money from Amazon or Leidos or Northrop Grumman, you cannot vote or participate in a bill that would directly impact those businesses.
Oh, wow. That's interesting.
And I think that's an easier first step than getting all corporate money out of politics, which is going to be hard because there are some entrenched people who want that money.
What do you do if there's like, if you have this giant stimulus bill, you could argue there are at least second order connections to corporations for tons of representatives. Wouldn't a lot of people have to recuse themselves for these big bills, and then they just wouldn't be able to take the money? I guess that's your
Everybody
point.
except the people not taking corporate money. And then what kind of a bill would it look like?
Yeah, it'll probably look pretty different.
Yeah. So
That actually lines up a question that Vaughn had. How would you not allow the military industrial complex lobbyists to get on your good side? Like, I have heard from many people who are familiar with congressional politics that if you want to make change, it's hard to do it in a 2-year term, and you kind of need a stretch to kind of build the relationships and figure out how the place works and yada yada. And in order to have more than a 2-year stretch, you got to get reelected. And in order to get reelected, you need piles of money. And that's where the lobbyists do kind of present an opportunity. And you kind of, I think some congressional representatives, maybe they say, well, I don't love these people, but if they help me get reelected, and then I can make an important vote for everybody else, then it's
right.
it's an acceptable trade-off. What's going to be? How do you think about that?
I think that's the first step on a slippery slope, and I wouldn't do it. So there's two answers to that. One is the true progressives that have been recently elected, beginning in 2018 and again in 2020, aren't doing it. AOC didn't take money from the military industrial complex, as far as I know. And secondly, I feel like if I'm doing a good job, people will want me to continue. And if I'm not, they should be able to vote me out. But in terms of funding, honestly, I mean, democracy dollars, right? Like it's such a simple answer.
Yeah, I've noticed you've mentioned ranked choice voting. Sounds like basic income, democracy dollars. Were you what was your take on the whole Yang platform when he was trying to make a run for the White House?
So here's the thing, like his run for the White House is one thing. I'd like to give you my take on Andrew Yang, never having met the man, of course.
Sure.
But here's what I think of him from someone who's just watched him. I think he's brilliant, like really like brilliant. And he saw the writing on the wall before COVID hit about the income disparity that was happening, right? Which is why he put out UBI, right? So there were a lot of people who were like, well, we don't need that. At the time, maybe they said that. I think a lot of those people now are like, oh, that would have been a good thing to have. And I think he saw the writing on the wall with democracy dollars because he saw the corruption. So I think even though he is not our current president, he influenced the political discussion significantly, that there are a lot of people talking about those issues and trying to put them forth. And I'm one of them. I never heard of democracy dollars before. I knew about UBI. I've read economics and whatnot, but that's never been applied to a country as large or developed as the US. It's something that's worked very well in in countries that are more economically disadvantaged. You get like a country that's got $2 a day and you institute a UBI. It's a huge benefit for people, right?
Yeah, it does. It does. I mean, the thing I'm curious about is within the kind of progressive wing of the Democratic Party, there seemed to be a bit of ambivalence about Andrew's run and for sure UBI. And I think one of the arguments from AOC was that, well, basic income is really a Trojan horse to kind of hollow out the government. And I wonder, like, I've always found that difficult to reconcile, because if you care about people who are struggling, there's very few things that can have as much impact as a direct cash payment where they, kind of decide what's best for them, versus like a large federal job guarantee where, some people would argue the government's trying to invent kind of jobs that may not be efficient. What's your take on that? Like, because it seems like this is a weird policy in that you have people, you have libertarians who like basic income, you have some conservative Republicans who like basic income, you have a lot of Democrats who are very kind of supportive of it, but it's not getting kind of the critical mass within the Democratic Party that a lot of us would have hoped to see by now. How do you think that's going to play out going forward?
So there was a lot in that statement. How it's going to play out going forward, I can't say. I'm not a prognosticator, but in terms of, I want to address several things. You raised a lot of really good points there. In terms of government and the jobs program, the Green New Deal is first and foremost a new deal. It is not government's job to make money. It's not government's job to do anything really outside of representing people. And yes, there would be maybe some jobs made up, but there were jobs made up in the original New Deal. And the reality is it stimulated the economy. We had the greatest economic growth in our history after that, right? So I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it's a good thing to create jobs for people, and especially because people don't want to not work, right? Like my first job was when I was like 12. People like to work. It makes them feel worthwhile and appreciated. And if there's any way for people to be put to work doing something of value that contributes in some way, I think that's a good thing. In terms of UBI and the confusion surrounding what it means and how it would work, I mean, I think that's because we haven't really dug into the details of how it would be implemented, right? The devil's in the details. So conceptually, I think if people really understood what it was, they would be conceptually supportive. In terms of how it's implemented, that's where people who are knowledgeable about how to implement something like this need to get involved and really work out the details in a way that is beneficial to the people who need it most, So for example, so I'm being a little bit elliptical. So for example, if you give UBI to, people and somebody is like, I'll just use Jeff Bezos because everybody uses Jeff Bezos, and he gets his, $1,000 a month or whatever the number turns out to be. Well, he clearly doesn't need that, right? So then it would be incumbent on him to say, well, you know what, I'm going to take it anyway, or I'm going to give it back, or, it's such a small amount, I'm just going to throw it away, whatever the reality is. So, it's one of these things where the people who have a lot of money can take it or not. I kind of feel like if somebody is a multimillionaire, they're going to hopefully give that money back through charity, through buying locally, through whatever. And certainly everybody, the vast majority, the bottom 90% of us are all going to be spending money in the communities. We're going to be raising our standard of living. Henry Ford basically created the middle class, right? By doubling workers' salaries at a time when there was a huge disparity in wealth, like the super rich and then the super poor. And he created a middle class because he was like, you know what, I want all of my employees to be able to afford to buy my product, right? And so what he basically did was direct economic stimulus. And that raised the entire standard of living and created the middle class for people. And I feel like UBI is an integral component of any larger picture of any larger financial plan that is created. It's not like you can do UBI and say, okay, we're done, boom, we're done. That doesn't work. It's not enough, right? It has to be, that's why I said devil's in the detail, because it has to be part of a larger and self-sustaining program that the government can put in place to help bring people up. And so we don't have people struggling to decide whether or not they want to go to the doctor or feed their children. We have people who are at risk of being evicted, who can't make ends meet. I mean, I think we're the only country in the world, I could be wrong, but I think we're the only country in the world where we have an actual place in our tax law for medical bankruptcies, right? I mean, that gets in more into like universal health care, but the point is people don't have enough money, right? So I don't know. I'm kind of going a lot of different places. I don't know if I answered your question. I hope I did.
Yeah.
I think on the surface it's simple, but when you really want to implement it, it's got to be done right by people who are knowledgeable and know what they're doing. And I don't think anyone who has a corporate motive can be part of that discussion.
Right. And at the same time, it also sounds like you're not, you don't have an allergic reaction to basic income the way there are some progressives who just hate it and think it's a terrible idea, and they don't like the idea of it being unconditional.
UBI. I'm supportive of UBI. I think it's great. I personally do not have the expertise to implement it. We need like Andrew Yang for that, right?
Right.
So
I'm sure he would be very happy to propose to kind of put a proposal on the table. Let me shift gears a little bit before we wrap up, Allie. I was curious about your role working in the Department of Defense.
Yeah.
You sound like a pro kind of conservation. I think you're for a Green New Deal. I don't think of the Department of Defense as a bastion of those values. I'm kind of curious, like what was that like working there, and what did you do?
Yeah. Well, what I did, my last position there was managing DoD's natural resources program. DoD is a steward of our nation's natural and cultural resources, and they have 25 million acres of land that they are responsible for managing. Much of that land is inaccessible because, military activities, right? But a lot of it is in a natural state because you need huge buffer zones and whatever. Mm-hmm. And they have some of the highest quality habitat, and they're the only federal agency that has remnants of every single habitat type that this country used to have, right? Because so much habitat destruction is just, killing us, right? Mm-hmm. And they have a core group of biologists who work on the ground, who are the most dedicated, high quality, amazing individuals you will ever meet, ever, in terms of natural resources conservation. In fact, I reached out to a couple former colleagues this weekend, and one was working on a herpetological survey, and another one was teaching a pollinator class, right? Like how to, just on their own time on a Saturday, because they are genuinely deeply passionate about caring and stewarding for these natural resources, and DoD's got amazing resources. I'll throw out one statistic, which is that per acre, so DoD is the 5th largest land managing agent, but per acre, DoD has more threatened and endangered species than any other land management agency, right? That means that the habitat is so good that more of these species that are at risk can live there because there's a place for them to live. There's migratory flyways. There's, whatever the situation is, right? And so during my time, I was able to help create a national, international, actually, hemisphere-wide migratory bird program. I was integral in that. And another one that's Partners in Flight, another one for Partners in Amphibian and Reptile Conservation that looked at herps, looking at pollinators, working with the North American Pollinator Protection Campaign, the NAPC. Anyone who eats really needs to think about pollinators. I know a lot of people don't, but if you like apples, almonds, chocolate, tequila, you need to care about pollinators, because without pollinators, we're losing these things, right? So it's important. And so a lot of people, when they think about the military, they think about, the F-35s and the wars, mm-hmm. and that's the military side of it. We were the civilian side of it. And I will say that depending on the administration, the bugs and bunnies don't always get the attention or the dollars. The discretionary fund, the legacy fund that I worked on when I first came to DoD in 1997, was at the time about $15 million. That budget was cut 75% by the time I left. So they had like $3 million by the time, which it's nothing in conservation, right? That's really nothing when you're talking about 25 million acres of land across 50 states. 3 million goes pretty fast. So plus you had to pay for the staff to manage it out of that. So there was like however much that was to pay for the staff out of that. And so
that would pay for like a armrest in a F-35 or.
Yeah.
It would be a very small percentage of the DoD budget, it sounds like.
We were literally that discretionary fund was a rounding error.
Yeah.
Really.
I will say I was impressed with the DoD a few years ago publishing a very kind of dispassionate and analytical report on the impact of climate change. On national security.
Yes.
It didn't get a lot of like promotion by the government. But I felt like it was a really interesting report, and it was kind of unfortunate that, hey, it's not like a bunch of tree huggers in San Francisco saying this. This is the Department of Defense.
Yeah.
And so there's not a lot of debate within at least the DoD report about whether climate change was real or not. But at that time, it was still in kind of public discussion. A lot of people were still saying, well, I don't really, the earth is always changing. No big deal. I mean, what's your take on the urgency of environmental change? I'm becoming more and more convinced that, stuff like COVID and climate change and animal migration and destruction of natural habitats, like they probably are connected.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think I have three things to say on that. First, I think people confuse weather with climate. Weather happens not just today or this week, but it happens over months and over a couple of years, right? That's weather. Climate happens over 30, 40, 50 years, right? So if you're looking at weather, then climate change should be viewed as climate weirding. Snowstorms, ice storms in Texas, 5 million acres burning out west, 90-degree temperatures in the tundra of the Arctic. That's climate weirding, and that is weather. That's an impact of climate change on weather, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is that in terms of climate change, the military recognized decades ago that natural resources are the root of a lot of conflict around the world. And the US military gets called in to deal with that conflict. And so it has a direct impact. And so for world peace, you need to make sure people are secure. There's been all this talk about people, immigrating into Trump was like, no more immigrants. Well, guess what? Their homelands are being destroyed by natural resource, related issues, storms, drought, fires, whatever those issues are, as well as by wars, civil wars, right? But a lot of it is natural resource driven. If you want to stop people fleeing their homelands because they have no more water or because, fires have ravaged everything, then you need to pay attention to climate change. And the third thing I want to say is, I'm just going to toot my own horn a little bit. I was integrally involved in all that climate change stuff with DoD and actually drafted the policy that was later implemented through our DoD natural resource instruction that required military land managers to consider the impacts of climate change on any land management action they took. And because DoD was the very first federal agency to have that in their policy. And because of that, we were grandfathered in when the Trump administration came in and tried to back the federal agencies out of that. So just my own little personal shout out here.
Well done on that report. I really enjoyed reading. Sadly, I don't think it was. Yeah, I don't think a lot of people read that report, and I think the Trump administration was actively. I didn't they release it like on a weekend or something. It was just like
they
didn't really.
The update of it they did, and I, like I said, I didn't write that report. I wrote I provided input that went in. A lot of people wrote that report. Like a lot of people wrote into that report.
I'm sure it was a team effort, and well, thank you for contributing your part to it. Anything else before we wrap up, Allie? This is a great conversation. I really, I love kind of your spirit and the fact that I think it's great that you have such a diverse background and you've lived so much and kind of experienced so much, and would love to see you go further. I should also thank you for being one of the first candidates to post yourself on ofthepeople.us, which is my side nonprofit effort. So was glad that I was able to discover you on my own site and bring you onto the Nerd Show.
Yeah, me too. Me too. And yes, first and foremost, I want to thank you for this opportunity. And actually, this has been super fun. I was kind of nervous originally. I'm excited to be, I hope I can officially call myself one of your nerds.
Of course.
So that's awesome. And then honestly, I want to say, we are running entirely grassroots, people-driven campaign, and we're going up against an incredibly super well-funded incumbent. Thank you for posting the website. Please go to allieforcongress.com. If you've got some money, donate $10, $20, $50. If you could do $3, $2 recurring, if you've got $1 a month that you could give to this campaign, please donate. We really do need the money. And we need volunteers, right? Click the volunteer button. If you can volunteer to do, call banking, or if you're in this area, door knocking when we can get out safely after the weather improves and COVID shots are out. Please do that. If you can blow us up on Twitter, get us to increase our following, let people know about our campaign, anything you can do. We truly are running a people-driven campaign, and we need people to help us drive it forward so that we can actually make significant changes and just get genuine representation, whether it's me or anybody else, in Congress, and get rid of the corporate interest motive, which needs to go.
Thank you, Allie. Yeah, so check out allieforcongress.com. And if you've enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to like and share it so people can get to know Allie in this long form format. And Allie, I hope you'll be back on the show again as the race heats up, and down the road, maybe we'll be doing this interview from your congressional office someday.
Yeah, man, I'd love that. That'd be great.
That would be sweet. In the meantime, we'll say goodbye, nerds.
Goodbye, nerds. Thank you.